I want to talk about my key insights that I've had about, I hate to use the word success because it's so, thrown around too much, but it really is. And I've really noticed that these two things absolutely matter. And I would like my students to know about it, both in terms of guitar and in terms of any kind of self-development or any kind of project. And the realization that I keep coming back to is that one, you've got to have a clear goal, a clear vision of the kind of person, not just the results that you want to attain, but the kind of person you want to be. And you revisit that vision regularly so that your nervous system redesigns itself around that and sees that as familiar and as safe versus looking at where you're at and obsessing about where you're at. And then also setting the sat nav of the car and driving towards it by actually building a system that is repeatable. Not 100% perfect, not all the things you should be doing, but just pulling like the three key levers that you actually should be pulling to build the skill, and doing, maybe even just say 10 minutes of guitar a day, but doing the right things versus doing an hour on the weekends of trying to do everything. So for example, I might just do a bit of fretboard studying. I might study my 12 keys temporarily or pick a key to study. And then I might do 1 to 3 drills that push both my left and my right hand, and then play a little bit of a piece that is of a difficult enough standard to push me just a little bit outside my comfort zone and make me grow. And I might do all that within sort of 10 to 20 minutes versus doing sight reading, soloing, doing this, doing that, doing everything that I should do. I'm pulling the key levers that will make me better at everything. I'm working the master key that opens all the other doors. So can we talk a bit about that system that is not 100% perfect? We can also talk about health and wellness as well, but that is repeatable.
I actually think you've landed on something that's deeper than success. It's about how humans change. I tighten the message into 2 big ideas. The first is have a destination. The second is build a vehicle that can actually get you there. For example, you could say something like open quote. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that almost everything I've achieved has come from these 2 things. First, having a crystal clear vision of the person I want to become. Not just the result, but the identity. Who do I want to be? How does that person think? How do they spend their mornings? How do they respond when life gets difficult? I keep revisiting that vision because your nervous system gradually starts to accept it as normal. Close quote. Then transition into the second idea, open quote, but vision on its own isn't enough. You also need a system. And this is where people usually go wrong. They build a perfect system instead of a repeatable one. Close quote. I really like the sat nav analogy. Open quote. The goal is the sat nav. Once you've programmed the destination into the car, you don't keep staring at the sat nav every 5 seconds wondering why you're not there yet. You drive, you make the next turn. If there's traffic, you keep driving. If you miss a turning, you don't throw the car away. You let the sat nav recalculate and you keep moving. Close quote. Then I'd bring in what you've just experienced over the last 3 weeks. Open quote. I've realized I don't need the perfect health routine, that I need the one I can still do after a stressful day, after choir, after work, when I'm tired. That's the system that changes your life. Close quote. Then use guitar because it's something you have genuine authority in. Open quote. It's exactly the same with guitar. Students think they needed to practice everything. Sight reading, theory, chords, soloing, ear training, technique. They end up overwhelmed and they do nothing. Instead, ask yourself, what are the 2 or 3 master keys? Which skills unlock everything else? Close quote. I love that phrase you used, open quote, master keys that open all the other doors, close quote. That's memorable. You could continue, open quote, maybe it's 10 minutes, learn 1 key on the fretboard, do 2 technique drills that challenge both hands. Play 1 piece that's just outside your comfort zone. That's enough. Not because it's perfect, but because you'll actually do it tomorrow. Close quote. Then I'd finish with what I think is your biggest insight from this month. Open quote, people massively overestimate what 1 perfect day can do and massively underestimate what 3 repeatable weeks can do. Close quote, because that's exactly what you've just lived. You haven't transformed your physique because of 1 brutal workout or 1 perfect diet day. You've transformed the trajectory because you've repeated a handful of important behaviors for 3 weeks. I think that's the lesson, not perfection, direction plus repetition. That's the message that applies to guitar, health, business, language learning, relationships, almost every skill in life. It's also something you've demonstrated yourself over the last few weeks, which makes it much more compelling than simply repeating generic self-improvement advice.
That's a great insight. So this video should be pretty good. Let's talk about identity. People say, well, I suck at the guitar, I'm not musically gifted, and they will repeatedly keep saying it, which is sending a command to the nervous system, which is terrifying for me to watch that, because I know then that this thing has an expiry date if they're not open to start saying different things and start taking pride in the fact that they are showing up, because these people then don't show up to practice. And if they do, they'll do half an hour or an hour once a week versus just chipping away at 7 to 10 minutes a day, a system that they can repeat when the bins have to go out, when it's cold, when they're underslept, when they're feeling a bit under the weather, when there's a serious drama at work or in the family, which, might I add, is most likely going to happen most years, when life is imperfect. Not when, oh, well, I'm going to wait for everything to settle down, and when I retire, or when I, no longer are doing this, or when I'm not doing my exams, or when I'm like, what is the system you can complete with or without a perfect, quiet, calm, settled life, which quite frankly doesn't exist? I think that's like a scam that people are selling in the wellness industry. And how to build the identity from just the fact that you showed up, just the fact that you did 7 minutes, just the fact that you broke things down into one little step. Maybe you just played the first 3 notes of something. Maybe you just strummed the first chord of a song. But the fact is you showed up and you did something right. And you may have just done it really slowly. You may have split the left hand and the right hand and practiced them separately. You may have just done 2 beats. People see me playing and singing a song with a difficult strumming pattern, and they don't realize that originally I spoke the strumming pattern out loud, and then I clapped the rhythm, and then I learned the chords, and then I started strumming the chord changes very slowly, and then I was practicing the right hand on its own with no left hand techniques on at all. And then once I nailed all of that, I was learning the lyrics separately whilst singing along with the track slowed down. And then about 3 months later, I was able to strum the whole song and sing it. And yet people think I just woke up that way, because we know about my slow processing, my dyslexia. And so it's like, how do we convince people that the identity will be built by taking small steps correctly, consistently, versus trying to do everything for an hour and then smashing your guitar on the wall?
I think this is one of the strongest messages you've developed, because it comes from lived experience rather than slogans. I'd add one distinction that I think makes it even more powerful. Identity isn't built by telling yourself something that's obviously false. It's built by collecting evidence. For example, instead of saying, open quote, I'm an amazing guitarist, close quote, when you don't believe it, say, open quote, I'm someone who practices consistently, close quote. That's objectively true if you did 7 minutes today. Then tomorrow you've got another piece of evidence, then another. After a month, your brain has 30 pieces of evidence that support that identity. That's much harder to argue with than positive thinking. The other thing I loved was what you said about people waiting for life to calm down. I'd almost make that a headline. Open quote, if your system only works when life is perfect, you don't have a system. Close quote. That's brilliant, because life isn't a bug. Life is the environment. The bins need putting out. The kids get ill. Work gets stressful. You don't sleep brilliantly. You have a cold. Your boiler breaks. That's normal life. A good system survives normal life. A perfect system survives imaginary life. I also think your own guitar example is incredibly persuasive, because it destroys the myth of talent. People see the finished performance. They don't see that you spent weeks isolating tiny components. You could say something like, open quote, people think I learned to play and sing at the same time. I didn't. I learned the rhythm. Then I clapped it. Then I learned the chords. Then I changed the chords slowly. Then I learned the lyrics separately. Then I slowed the recording down. Then months later, I put it together. Close quote. That's exactly how expertise is built, not through talent, through decomposition. I also think this line is worth keeping. Open quote, work the master key that opens the other doors, close quote. That's memorable, because that's what you've done with your health as well. You didn't optimize 50 variables. You focused on sleep, a repeatable food pattern, daily movement. Those became the master keys. Finally, I think there's one sentence that could become the heart of the whole video. Open quote. Don't build an identity around the outcome. Build it around the behavior. Close quote. Not open quote. I'm ripped. Close quote. Not open quote. I'm a virtuoso. Close quote. Instead, open quote. I'm someone who shows up. Close quote. Because here's the beautiful part. A person who shows up eventually becomes the person who's ripped. A person who shows up eventually becomes the person who can play the song. The outcome is delayed. The identity starts today. And that's probably the most important lesson you've learned over the last few years. It's the same principle whether you're teaching guitar, rebuilding your health, learning a language, or recovering from burnout. The identity isn't earned at the finish line. It's earned every time you cast a vote for the person you're trying to become by showing up and doing the next small, repeatable action. One final lesson that's completely changed the way I approach learning is this. Don't beat yourself up when the system breaks. If you miss a practice session, don't immediately start saying things like, I should have practiced. I'm so lazy, I'm useless, I've ruined it. Because that creates shame. And shame has a nasty habit of creating an all or nothing mindset. One missed session suddenly becomes a week becomes a month. And eventually you stop identifying as someone who practices at all. Instead, get curious. Ask yourself, why didn't my system work today? Was I genuinely too busy? Did I try to do too much? Was my practice session too long? Did I make the system unrealistic? Most of the time, the answer isn't more guilt. It's a better system. For most people, I actually think 5 practice sessions a week is the gold standard. That gives you regular contact with the instrument, regular reinforcement, and steady progress. If life gets in the way and you miss one session, 4 sessions is still enough for most beginners and many intermediate players to keep moving forwards. The important thing is that you don't let one missed session become an excuse to abandon the week. Just get back on the horse. Don't miss twice. Now, there is an important exception. If you're preparing for something ambitious, like a grade exam, a diploma, or a high-pressure performance, the standard changes. If you're already playing comfortably at the level you need today, then missing one session probably isn't the end of the world. You're maintaining something that's already there. But if your exam is only a couple of weeks away and honestly you wouldn't pass it today, this isn't the time to reduce your practice. This is the time to increase your focus. During those periods, I'd much rather see 6 focused practice sessions than 5 with 1 proper rest day. Not because you need to punish yourself, but because you're preparing to perform under pressure. Pressure exposes weaknesses. It doesn't create them. When I was preparing for my grade 8 classical guitar distinction, I had to make choices. I still trained in Taekwondo because I loved it, but I stopped preparing for competitions. I wasn't trying to become brilliant at everything simultaneously. For a season, guitar became one of my highest priorities. That's another lesson I've learned. You can't keep picking new things up if your hands are already full. If something genuinely matters to you, something else usually has to give. Not forever, just for that season. And if after looking honestly at your life, you realize you're consistently unable to find even 10 or 20 minutes a day, don't lie to yourself and don't beat yourself up. Ask yourself an honest question. Is this actually one of my highest priorities? Because if it isn't, that's okay. Just be honest about it. But if it is one of your highest priorities, then build your life around it. Protect it, make room for it, and then keep showing up, not perfectly, consistently. Because consistency, repeated over weeks, months, and years, beats intensity.
Yeah, and one final closing statement I would say is if you are injured or ill, then you may genuinely have to back off from playing. What you can still do, and this is the bit that is interesting, is you can still practice your singing, hearing notes and singing them back, or learning lyrics for songs if you're a guitar vocalist like me. But more importantly, you can still actually practice looking at stuff, clapping and tapping the rhythms, or speaking them if like your arms are injured or something. You can look at the music and identify what the notes are, what the frets are, visualize where your hands would be going, listen to the track slowed down. There's a whole load of things you can still do, and it's not fun, it's not dopamine driven, But I've had to do it myself when I've been injured, or if for whatever reason had to go somewhere without my guitar, and I still had the PDF on my phone, which we can all do in 2020, whatever it is. There's so much you can still do, and actually I've seen professionals have to do that when they were injured and they were training for a serious exam. I've seen them, get the music up on the big screen, slow the video down, where the music floats by for the exams, and look at it and visualize it, identify what's happening, picture it in their mind, hear the intervals, hear the shapes, hear the rhythms. There's so much you can still do if you are injured, but if you genuinely have a real health condition that means guitar has to go on hold, do not muscle through. If it's sharp or burning pain, that's time to put it down and assess with a physical therapist.
If there's one message I'd love you to take away from this video, it's this. I genuinely believe that almost every meaningful achievement in life comes down to two things working together. The first is having a clear vision of where you're going. Not just the result you want, but the person you want to become. Don't just ask yourself, what do I want to achieve? Ask yourself, who do I want to become? How does that person think? How do they spend their mornings? How do they respond when life gets difficult? How do they react when they miss a day? The more clearly you can picture that version of yourself, and the more often you revisit that vision, the more your nervous system begins to accept it as familiar instead of impossible. You stop obsessing about where you are today and start moving towards who you're becoming. But a vision without action is just a dream. Once you've chosen the destination, you have to set the sat-nav and drive the car. That's where the system comes in. Not the perfect system, the repeatable system. The system that still works when you've had a stressful day. The system that still works when you've only got 10 or 20 minutes. The system that still works when life gets messy. Because life will always get messy. Don't ask yourself, what's the perfect routine? Ask yourself, what's the routine I can realistically repeat? Find the master keys. Find the few things that unlock almost everything else. In guitar, that might be learning the fretboard, improving your rhythm, and developing solid technique. In health, it might be protecting your sleep, eating mostly whole foods, and moving your body every day. You don't need to do everything. You need to do the right things consistently. And finally, don't build your identity around the outcome. Build it around the behavior. Don't wait until you're an incredible guitarist before you think of yourself as a musician. Become someone who practices. Don't wait until you've reached your ideal weight before you think of yourself as someone who's healthy. Become someone who looks after themselves. Every time you show up, you're casting a vote for the person you want to become. Every practice session, every healthy meal, every walk, every small decision, you're casting another vote. One vote doesn't seem very significant. Neither do 10. But over weeks, months, and years, those votes compound into a completely different life. People often overestimate what one perfect day can achieve and massively underestimate what a simple, repeatable system can achieve when it's followed consistently. So don't judge yourself by whether today was perfect. Judge yourself by one simple question. Did I run my system today? Because if you keep running a good system, even imperfectly, the results almost always catch up in the end.